In 1775, the British Empire was one of the most powerful forces on earth. It had a professional army, a dominant navy, global wealth, and control over vast territories. Against it stood 13 colonies along the eastern edge of North America, divided by region, economy, religion, and local interests. Yet within 8 years, those colonies would win recognition as an independent nation, the United States of America. The American Revolutionary War was not simply a sudden uprising over one tax or one angry protest. It was the military phase of a much larger political revolution, shaped by years of disputes over power, rights, representation, and imperial control. From the first shots at Lexington and Concord to the final treaty in Paris, the war tested whether a rebellion of local militias and an improvised army could survive long enough to force an empire to negotiate. The roots of the conflict go back to 1763, when Britain emerged victorious from the 7 Years' War, known in North America as the French and Indian War. Britain had gained dominance in North America, but victory came with enormous debt. British leaders believed the colonies should help pay for their own defense and administration. Many colonists saw the issue differently. They had long managed many of their own local affairs, and they objected to Parliament taxing them without colonial representation. Measures such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts turned frustration into organized resistance. These laws were not only about money, they raised a deeper question: could Parliament govern the colonies in all cases, or did colonists possess political rights that London had to respect? Tension became increasingly visible in Boston, one of the centers of colonial resistance. British troops were sent to occupy the city and enforce imperial authority, but their presence only deepened resentment. On March 5, 1770, confrontation between soldiers and civilians erupted into the Boston Massacre, in which British troops fired into a crowd, killing several colonists. The event became a powerful symbol for Patriot leaders, who used it to argue that standing armies threatened liberty. Over the next few years, disputes continued to escalate. Britain tried to restore order. Colonial activists built networks of resistance. By 1774, Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts in response to defiance in Massachusetts, attempting to punish the colony and reassert control. Instead, the acts convinced many colonists that their liberties were in danger together. By April 1775, the crisis had moved from argument to armed confrontation. British forces in Massachusetts sought to seize colonial military supplies and weaken Patriot militias. On April 19, British troops marched toward Concord, passing through Lexington, where local militia gathered. Shots were fired, and although the exact first shooter remains disputed, the moment became legendary as the opening of the war. At Concord and during the British retreat back to Boston, colonial militia inflicted serious losses by using local terrain, rapid communication, and irregular tactics. These battles proved that colonial resistance was no longer just political protest. It was armed rebellion. The British still held major advantages, but the colonies had shown that ordinary militia could mobilize quickly and challenge imperial troops on American ground. After Lexington and Concord, the rebellion needed organization. In June 1775, the Second Continental Congress took a crucial step by creating the Continental Army from colonial-based Patriot forces. The Congress unanimously appointed George Washington as commander-in-chief. Washington was not chosen because he had the largest battlefield record, but because he brought military experience, political credibility, and symbolic unity. As a Virginian, he helped make the conflict more than a New England uprising. His central task was extraordinarily difficult. He had to turn short-term militias into a functioning army, maintain morale, secure supplies, and keep the cause alive against a better-trained enemy. In August 1775, King George III declared the colonies to be in a state of rebellion, making compromise increasingly unlikely. The first major Patriot success came at Boston. British troops were trapped in the city while colonial forces surrounded them. Washington took command of the siege and faced immediate challenges: shortages of gunpowder, uneven discipline, and expiring enlistments. The breakthrough came when artillery captured from Fort Ticonderoga was moved with great effort to the heights overlooking Boston. Once those guns threatened the British position, the British commander recognized that holding the city was too costly. In March 1776, the British evacuated Boston. For the Continental Army, this was an early and important victory. It showed that Washington could coordinate a large operation and that the British could be forced from a major colonial city. But the war was far from won. While armies maneuvered, the political meaning of the conflict changed dramatically. In July 1776, the Second Continental Congress moved from resistance to independence. On July 2, it passed the Lee Resolution, declaring the colonies free and independent states. 2 days later, on July 4, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The declaration did more than announce separation from Britain. It gave the war a larger ideological purpose, arguing that governments derived their power from the consent of the governed and that people had the right to alter or abolish governments that violated their rights. This transformed the stakes. Patriots were no longer fighting merely to restore old colonial privileges. They were fighting to create a new sovereign nation. Britain responded with force. In 1776, General William Howe launched a major campaign in New York and New Jersey. New York City was strategically vital. It had a deep harbor, strong commercial importance, and a location that could help divide New England from the other colonies. British forces defeated Washington's army and captured the city in November. For the Patriots, the situation became desperate. Washington's army retreated, enlistments were expiring, and confidence was collapsing. Then Washington struck back with a daring winter move. He secretly crossed the Delaware River and attacked Hessian forces at Trenton, followed by another victory at Princeton. These were not massive battles, but they mattered enormously. They revived morale, kept the army together, and proved the rebellion could survive disaster. In 1777, the war reached a turning point. British strategy aimed to fracture the colonies and crush the rebellion by controlling key regions. Howe moved against Philadelphia, the seat of the Continental Congress, forcing Congress to flee to Baltimore. Capturing the Patriot capital seemed important, but another campaign in the north became far more decisive. British General John Burgoyne advanced from Canada, hoping to cut off New England. Instead, his army became isolated and was surrounded. In October 1777, Burgoyne surrendered at Saratoga. The American victory changed the international perception of the war. Until then, European powers had doubted whether the colonies could truly defeat Britain. Saratoga suggested that American independence was possible, and that Britain could be weakened by supporting the rebellion. Foreign support became essential to the Patriot cause. After Saratoga, France moved from secret aid to open alliance. In February 1778, France signed a treaty of alliance with the Americans, bringing money, supplies, troops, naval power, and diplomatic legitimacy. This transformed the war from a colonial rebellion into a wider global conflict. Britain now had to defend not only North America, but also interests in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and beyond. Spain later allied with France against Britain through the Treaty of Aranjuez in 1779, though Spain did not formally ally with the United States. These alliances stretched British resources and gave the Americans what they had lacked most, a powerful navy-backed partner, capable of challenging Britain on the seas. The war also expanded across the continent and affected many communities beyond the main armies. On the frontier, Native American nations faced impossible choices as imperial and colonial forces fought for control of land. Some factions within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois, allied with Britain, seeing American expansion as a direct threat. In 1779, the Sullivan Expedition carried out a scorched earth campaign against British allied Haudenosaunee settlements, destroying towns and food supplies. Meanwhile, raids and counter-raids continued along the frontier. This part of the war reveals a harsher reality. Independence for the colonies was tied to violence over land, sovereignty, and survival. The revolution did not mean the same thing to every group caught inside it. After mixed results in the north, British strategy shifted toward the southern colonies. British leaders believed there were many loyalists in the south who would support the crown if British troops appeared in strength. Under commanders including Henry Clinton and Lord Cornwallis, Britain initially achieved success, capturing key positions and winning battles. But the southern campaign became exhausting. Patriot forces used a mix of regular troops, militia resistance, and guerrilla tactics to wear down British control. Cornwallis eventually moved into Virginia, where he established a position at Yorktown. What looked like a defensible base became a trap when American and French forces converged by land, while the French Navy blocked escape by sea. The global alliance had finally created a decisive local opportunity. In September and October 1781, Yorktown became the decisive siege of the war in North America. George Washington, French General Rochambeau, and Allied forces surrounded Cornwallis's army, while French naval power prevented British evacuation or reinforcement. This coordination was exactly what the Americans had needed for years: continental persistence combined with French military and naval strength. Cornwallis was trapped. In October 1781, he surrendered. The surrender did not immediately end all fighting worldwide, because Britain was still at war with France and Spain. But in North America, Yorktown shattered the practical hope of defeating the rebellion. For Britain, continuing the war against the Americans became politically and strategically difficult. Negotiation, once unthinkable, became the realistic path forward. The American Revolutionary War officially ended with the Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783. In that treaty, Great Britain acknowledged the sovereignty and independence of the United States. The 13 colonies were no longer colonies, they were recognized as an independent nation. Other agreements, including the Treaties of Versailles, settled Britain's conflicts with France and Spain, forcing Britain to cede territories such as Tobago, Senegal, Minorca, and Florida. But the most lasting result was the creation of the United States and the demonstration that an imperial power could be defeated by a sustained revolutionary movement, especially when local resistance, political commitment, military endurance, and international alliances came together. The outcome had seemed uncertain for most of the war, but by surviving long enough to win at Yorktown, the Patriots forced the British Empire to accept a new reality. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.